One of the things that I noticed earlier this morning, I was talking about this sort of inner display of the vision of the fabric of consciousness, and one of the things that I had noticed was that on a more apparently individual level, that there is this thought, assumption, that most people are very familiar with dealing with their own psychology, their own karmic makeup, the way you're hooked up karmically as a person. And we generally have an idea, in some way or another, that I need to either get rid of that karmic makeup, solve it, understand it, meditate it away or whatever. But actually this is not the case. The difficulty only starts to arise when we reach out and have an emotional attachment with our karmic makeup. So the karmic makeup of each person, your personal wants and not wants and preferences and all the rest, is not problematic in any way, really. What becomes problematic is this sort of hooking in emotionally with it. And when we talk about being not identified with it, not having your identity confined to its confines, it's important to realize that identity takes place 98% on the emotional level. That's where it's all happening. You can sort of become unattached in a certain abstract, philosophical, intellectual way, and most people, you realize that doesn't really amount to much, does it? You can have a certain understanding that you're not your thoughts, and that you're not your feelings, and that you're not your personal identity. But that's about 2%. The other 98% is an emotional connection. It's like this tether, this tie, right? You can't see it. You can't reach out and grasp it. And yet this is what identity with the form, with the karmic makeup, this is what it's made out of. Identification is made out of 98% emotion. It's an emotional attachment, very, very like the emotional attachment you get to a person. Very, very much like that. The quality of it and what it's made of is very similar when you become very attached to a person emotionally. And so most of us human beings are attached in a very similar way. Emotionally attached with this very personal identity. So it's really important to see that it's not the intellectual component that's really that strong, it's the emotional component. When you emotionally have no attachment to your own ideas, preferences, wants, and all the rest, well then you're free of it, aren't you? If you can imagine having no sort of abstract philosophical attachment, but a very strong emotional attachment, you can see that you'd still be extraordinarily attached. But if you didn't have the emotional attachment to your ideas, beliefs, opinions, self-image, and all the rest, you see there's not much left of it, is there? This is the energy that holds it together, is on the emotional level. And emotion is derived by our desire and a seeming need to survive, to continue. That's why when you start to play with someone's beliefs, they get a little testy. Because not intellectually, but emotionally, they're feeling that their lives are threatened emotionally. Not intellectually, they wouldn't feel necessarily their lives are being threatened, but emotionally, you better believe it. Which is why we go to war with each other, to protect them. Because we feel like they are when they are threatened, that our very sense of self, our very existence is being threatened. And so what I saw in this process was very, very clear, as I said, that I could see that it was the emotional tethers that were the point, not the intellectual ones. Those were pretty malleable. It's easy to change your mind, and it's not so easy to change your feelings. And through this emotional attachment, this internal whirlwind, this sort of vortex of energy and feeling and emotion and sensation starts to spin inside of you through these emotional attachments. You get an emotional attachment to anything, it starts this sort of, how can I say, energetic spinning inside. And if you get enough emotional attachment to your appearance, your form, your identity, your thoughts, all the rest, then you have this immense vortex inside happening, this spinning, whirling vortex, and this is what gives us your sense of self. This is actually where our people are identifying with their sense of self, is this churning movement, this familiar, emotional, this movement. It's ultimately inside, it's just a churning movement of energy that's caused by emotional attachment. It's about as clear as I can make it. You see it at some point for yourself. And then the identity and the sense of an entity is actually derived from that swirling vortex of very conflictory energies inside. And that gives this very solid sense of self. That's where it's derived from. That's what sustains it. That's why it feels like when you get an emotion or cord disconnected, you feel like you're going to die sometimes. You ever broken up with somebody and feel like, I'm just going to die? Well, you feel like you're going to die because an emotional cord's been severed and it's not feeding this whirling inner vortex anymore. And so that energy that it derived from that emotional attachment is gone. So as far as this swirling energy that creates a sense of separate self is concerned, it literally did lose a very vital part of its energy through which it creates itself. So it actually is dying. That's why people feel like they just might die. Remember when you're like an adolescent and you lose your first boyfriend or girlfriend? You just think, I won't wake up tomorrow, Mom. I hope I won't. And it's why people at times in the spiritual process sometimes feel like they're dying. Is because this swirling inside is actually, if the emotional attachments start to wither away, or you just simply wake up from them, the center, see, there's what I call the center, there's not really something there, right? It's just, that's why I call it a whirling vortex of energy. There's really nothing there in the center, but this spinning inside happens. It gives sense of a very solid center. But the center starts to fall away. Especially as this natural state of unattachment happens. The more awake you get, the more unattached you get. So unattachment isn't something, most spiritual people waste their time trying to be unattached. The effort to be unattached proves you're extraordinarily attached. The very desire to not have desire is a strong desire. You see what I mean? It's ludicrous and ridiculous on the face of it, right? I'm trying to let go. What could that possibly mean? I'm trying to let go. They're opposed to each other. So non-attachment isn't something that one can actually do. It kind of comes with the bargain of being really awake. It's a byproduct. So the unfortunate thing about, when we're pursuing and holding on to the identity of spiritual seekers, we are trying to imitate enlightened behavior or the inner life of an enlightened being. We're trying not to have attachments. But of course, the last thing you think of when you're really awake is to try not to have attachments. It never occurs to you not to have attachments because basically you have so few, if any. And because that's not happening, because your identity has woken up from that, this swirling vortex isn't deriving energy. There's no energy if it's not attached. And eventually the center will collapse. Eventually the center falls away. Because there's nothing there to sustain it. It's like you ever let the water out in your bathtub and you get those little whirlpools going down the drain? Well, the whirlpool disappears when there's no more water. Just like the center disappears when there's nothing more for which it can derive energy. And so the center falls away. And that's why it feels free. That's the freedom. It's because this energy isn't swirling itself into something very tight. It's just in its natural state. Which is not really to be swirling into something very tight and constricted, but actually to be very vast and relaxed. And not striving. And so, not only when we awaken do we just awaken, but it actually starts to change the whole experience of being. As I said earlier, that awakening is actually the beginning of a whole other process.